Let's start with Trump's achievements first. Economic growth. When Donald Trump took office in 2017, he promised to run the country like a business. For the first 3 years, the numbers were hard to argue with. The stock market hit record highs dozens of times, and the GDP grew at a steady clip. By early 2020, the unemployment rate reached 3.5%, the lowest in half a century. Unemployment for African Americans, Hispanic Americans, and Asian Americans hit the lowest levels ever recorded in U.S. history. Critics say he inherited a growing economy from the previous administration, but the Trump bump in small business confidence immediately after his election suggests his pro-business rhetoric changed the atmosphere overnight. The 2017 tax reform. The crown jewel of Trump's legislative agenda was the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act of 2017. It was the biggest overhaul of the tax code in 30 years. It slashed the corporate tax rate from 35% down to 21%. The idea was simple. If companies have more cash, they'll invest in America, hire more people, and raise wages. For the average family, the standard deduction nearly doubled. While the left argued this was a scam for the rich, the reality was most middle-class Americans saw more money in their Friday paychecks. However, it added roughly $1.9 trillion to the national debt. Was the short-term boost worth the long-term bill? That question sets off fireworks in congressional debates, reshaping the judiciary. If you want to know why the U.S. legal landscape looks so different today, look at Trump's judicial appointments. He successfully appointed 3 Supreme Court justices: Gorsuch, Kavanaugh, and Barrett, and over 200 federal judges. He picked originalists, judges who interpret the Constitution exactly as written. This shift paved the way for the overturning of Roe v. Wade, a move that delighted his base and enraged his opponents. This is perhaps his most permanent achievement. These judges will be making decisions for the next 40 years. Foreign policy. Trump's foreign policy was built on breaking the rules. He was the first president in decades not to start a new war. Instead, he focused on deals. The Abraham Accords were a massive shock to the system, normalizing relations between Israel and several Arab nations like the UAE and Bahrain. For decades, experts said this couldn't happen without a Palestinian peace deal first. He also replaced NAFTA with the USMCA, arguing that the old deal sent American jobs to Mexico. He pressured NATO allies to pay more for their defense, which resonated with voters tired of the U.S. footing the bill. Criminal justice reform. In a rare moment of bipartisan unity, Trump signed the First Step Act in 2018. This was a massive win for those who felt the war on drugs had unfairly targeted minority communities with overly harsh sentences. The law aimed to reduce recidivism and fix sentencing disparities. It was a strange sight. The law and order president working with celebrities like Kim Kardashian to let people out of prison. It proved Trump was willing to buck Republican tradition if he thought a different approach would work. Energy independence and space policy. Under Trump, the U.S. became a net exporter of oil and natural gas for the first time in nearly 70 years. By rolling back regulations on fracking and coal, he pushed for energy dominance. This kept gas prices relatively low and reduced U.S. reliance on Middle Eastern oil. In the final frontier, he created the Space Force, the first new military branch since 1947. The goal was serious: protecting American satellites from foreign interference. He also launched the Artemis program, aiming to put the first woman and the next man on the moon. Veterans Affairs and infrastructure. For years, the Veterans Affairs was a mess. Trump signed the Veterans Affairs Mission Act, allowing veterans to go to private doctors if the VA couldn't see them quickly. It was a move toward privatization that most veterans actually loved because it gave them choices. On infrastructure, he focused more on deregulation than on big spending bills. By streamlining environmental reviews, he tried to make it easier for projects to get off the ground quickly. We will now move to his failures and polarizing controversies. The COVID-19 response. Now, we flip the coin. Trump's handling of COVID-19 is widely cited as his biggest failure. While Operation Warp Speed was a scientific miracle, developing a vaccine in months rather than years, the president's messaging was chaotic. He frequently clashed with his own scientists, like Dr. Anthony Fauci, and suggested unproven treatments like hydroxychloroquine. His refusal to embrace mask wearing early on turned a public health crisis into a political identity test. Critics say his lack of leadership led to thousands of unnecessary deaths and a fragmented national response that left the U.S. trailing behind other nations. Political polarization. Trump did not just participate in the culture war. He led the charge. His rhetoric on Twitter and at rallies was designed to fire up his base, but it deeply divided the country. When Black Lives Matter protests erupted in 2020 following the death of George Floyd, Trump leaned hard into a law and order persona. He sent federal agents into cities like Portland and threatened to use the military against rioters. While his supporters saw this as standing up for the silent majority, Others saw it as an attack on the First Amendment. By the end of his term, America felt like two different countries. Trade wars and economic downturn. Trade war with China was supposed to bring manufacturing jobs back to the US. Instead, it led to a tit-for-tat tariff battle that cost American farmers billions in exports. The government had to bail out farmers with $28 billion in subsidies. While the trade war forced China to the table, it raised prices for American consumers on everything from steel to electronics. Then came 2020. The pandemic-induced lockdowns triggered the steepest economic crash since the Great Depression. While the crash wasn't his fault, the resulting $8 trillion increase in national debt left a massive burden on the next generation: healthcare and environmental rollbacks. One of Trump's loudest promises was to repeal and replace Obamacare, the ACA. Despite having a Republican Congress for 2 years, he failed to get it done. The skinny repeal failed by a single vote in the Senate. This left the U.S. healthcare system in limbo. Environmentally, Trump withdrew the U.S. from the Paris Climate Agreement, arguing it was a bad deal for American workers. He rolled back over 100 environmental rules, including protections for wetlands and limits on power plant emissions. To developers, this was progress. To scientists, it was a dangerous ignoring of the climate crisis. Immigration, build the wall, was the slogan that defined his 2016 campaign. While he didn't finish a continuous concrete wall from sea to sea, his administration built or reinforced about 450 miles of barriers. Beyond the physical wall, he implemented the Remain in Mexico policy, forcing asylum seekers to wait outside the U.S. while their cases were processed. To his supporters, this was taking national sovereignty seriously. To his critics, it was a humanitarian low point, especially the zero-tolerance policy leading to family separations. It fundamentally changed the flow of migration during the withdrawal from international agreements. Beyond the Paris Agreement, Trump pulled out of the Iran nuclear deal and the World Health Organization. He argued that these organizations were either one-sided or puppets of China. This isolationist approach damaged alliances with Europe and Japan. He also frequently threatened to withdraw from NATO, demanding that member nations significantly increase their defense spending. For the first time since World War II, the world started looking for leadership elsewhere, as Trump made it clear that globalism was the enemy. This sudden retreat from multilateralism left a global power vacuum that rival nations eagerly attempted to fill. January 6th and the Capitol riot. The controversial event of his presidency was its ending. After months of claiming the 2020 election was stolen, without providing evidence that held up in court, Trump held a rally on January 6, 2021. What followed was a violent breach of the U.S. Capitol by his supporters. Regardless of your political leanings, the image of the Capitol being overrun was a global embarrassment and a failure of the peaceful transfer of power. It led to his second impeachment and remains the defining moment for his detractors. To his supporters, it was a protest gone wrong. To his critics, it was an attempted coup. It left democratic processes fragile.
See you in the next one. Until then, keep watching our other videos.